students, welcome to our digital Devo for tonight. I am here with Kate. And Kate, can you tell us something about yourself? Or better yet, can you tell us something about your excellent husband?
Well, I'm married to Dan, the excellent husband.
Who knew?
And youth director. And that's...
Yeah, well, according to our daughter, that's what makes you special, is that you married me.
That is true. On her Mother's Day card, she did say that what makes me special is that I married Dan.
So speaking of Mother's Day, how was your Mother's Day this year on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would say a 10. It was great. It was a wonderful day. If any of you guys need notes for the very long time future, you can talk to him because it was a fabulous day. I normally try to control things and have very high expectations for Mother's Day, but he did pretty well.
Yeah. So I think the key, I'll let my secret, is since we have kids, the key was keeping the kids away from Kate and letting her sleep in. I think that was probably the greatest gift.
He did. He let me sleep in and brought me a latte from my favorite coffee shop.
Yeah. So.
And then made brunch. Then we did my parents watch the kids while we had a date at the end of the day. Got to go to the beach and get PT's grill. So it was a very nice day. He did a great job.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So our topic for today is God's control. And I think this is something that we obviously have seen in our life and things we work through. And I think at times we are still trying to figure out in our lives. As we do these interviews, it's mostly we try to get the story or the experience of the person that we're interviewing. But today is a little different because being married to Kate, we share the same experiences for the past few years. And so our experience and our story this is kind of both of our stories. So we'll be doing a little bit of talking, but Kate will bear the brunt of it just because I think it hit her a little bit differently. And I think I'll let her talk about it, but just through the experience, one of the things that came up for both of us was God's control, I think. And where is God in these certain situations? So, Kate, I'll hand it over to you. I guess, can you give us, what is your experience with working through understanding God's control in your life?
Yeah. So, like I said, I do struggle with just wanting to be in charge and wanting to have control of a situation. I am a firstborn daughter, so I kind of blame it on that. But Dan and I have been married, this year will be 8 years, and really our whole marriage has just been a lot of change, would you say?
Yeah.
Like, we got married, and then the school, Dan was actually a teacher for a while, and the school kind of plummeted. And so he found himself with no teaching job for the year, and so that was a quick change into a new industry. And then I was
not happy about leaving Wilmington.
Yes, well, I haven't even gotten to that yet. So we very quickly ended up moving to Chicago. That was a quick change, completely out of our control. It turned out very well, but at the time you don't see it that way. You see it in your little tiny view right here. And we moved back home. Dan stayed in his same job, same industry, but then pretty soon afterwards we decided to foster. So obviously with foster, you're inviting a situation into your life that you have zero control over at all. And you're pretty much placing yourself in that situation knowing full well that you're not going to be able to control anything about your life. You're going to have people coming in all the time and analyzing things. You're going to be, changing kids. It's not like when you find out you're expecting a baby and you have 9 months to prepare. We would get a new child with sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes 2 days.
Maybe 9 hours on a good day.
And so, you're kind of choosing the situation that you don't have control over. And that's kind of the situation that we're going to talk about tonight, I think. And one thing just with God, talking about God's control, that I have, I guess you might say, struggled with. I know that this is true. One thing that I've struggled with is how is God sovereign? And I know that God is in control of all things, but as a human being, I feel that my way is better sometimes, and I don't see the big picture that God sees. I don't see the future. I see right here and right now, and sometimes it just seems like, man, why did the Lord allow that to happen when that doesn't seem like it's the best thing?
Yeah, or I think a good word is fair. It doesn't seem fair for us.
So one thing in particular, I know many of our church families know that when Dan and I first started fostering our very first little boy, his name was Dell, and we had him for 9 months. And the social workers had all said, "Oh, this is a surefire adoption. Just wait it out. You're going to be adopting this kid." So we had even told him what his adopted name was going to be, and in our minds, in our family's minds, it was a sure thing. Well, nothing is sure in foster care. You have control over nothing. And in December of 2016, biological father came and took custody of him out of nowhere. So that was really hard. I wouldn't even say it was a struggle, because I think even sometimes now it's still a struggle with dealing with God's decisions in that situation. So I actually had written a Google Doc one night when I was just really struggling, and it's not that we don't struggle now. I would say that there's a lot of grief in foster care, and
yeah, but I think we have perspective now, which is a big
maybe
thing.
A little bit, yeah.
And I think when we go back to God's control in general, it's in the moment where we don't understand God's control. I think when we pull ourselves back from the situation and we look back and we remember, just kind of tying this in, when the Bible talks about meditating, it's about remembering and thinking about the things that God has done. That's why it's such an important aspect to meditate on God's Word, to go back to understanding who He is and the promises that He set. But, I mean, I think you're right. I think we kind of have a better, not that we fully understand or fully know why, but with time comes perspective, and you can really see where God was working in us, and seeing where God's control through every situation. Not necessarily saying that we have the answers, because I think that's the hard part with control, is not knowing and being able to say I don't know, and being okay with that, content with that. I think is a big part of it.
So a couple things that I had written just as notes to myself that I hadn't really gone back to it too much. I wrote this doc one night when I was just really kind of wanting to see all of my thoughts together. And a couple things that I wrote down is, it says, I wrote a note to myself, when you wrestle with reconciling that God is sovereign in our circumstances over the last few years, here's some things to think about. One, I put that the situation of losing Dell, I think to us, felt like a failure. And it was out of our control. So it's not like we failed him. We loved him. I feel like we did what God had called us to do during the time that we had him. We loved him. We taught him about the Lord. That was what God had called us to do. God was always in control of that situation. He knew everything that was going to happen before Dell stepped foot into our house. God knew everything that was going to go on 9 months later. So that's one thing that I really struggled with, is the feeling of failure. And so that's the first thing I wrote, is that we did not fail Dell. We loved him like God wanted us to, and that love was not wasted. Number 2 is that God did not fail us. He did not fail to show up. He didn't turn his back on our pain or our sorrow or our suffering. And in fact, he walked us through it. I don't know how people that aren't believers get through hard things in their life. As too, we had the support of our church and our family, and God did not fail us by allowing something to happen the way that he did, by allowing us to lose Dell. The third thing is, I think I remember praying at the very end, and I even remember the church one Sunday night praying for us in the situation that we were going through. And I thought that, well, there's no way that God won't allow us to keep Dell, because so many people are praying for this to happen. And I thought that God was going to use that situation for his glory, but in the way that I wanted. And I thought to myself, God, so many people are praying in this way. You're going to use this. You're going to perform this miracle, and it's going to be great. Everything's going to turn out rosy and perfect, because why wouldn't you, Lord? Like, that doesn't even make sense that you would take him away from a Christian family that was going to raise him to love the Lord. And I think that's a dangerous thing to think about. As Christians, like, not everything works out the way that we want, and not even everything works out the way that we pray for. And I think that's one thing that I really struggled with, was kind of assuming that God was going to do something, that was how he was going to work it out, because, oh, well, Lord, so many Christians are praying that this would be the outcome.
Yeah. Oh, I think also onto that, because it's a seemingly good thing, right?
Yeah,
like, I mean, when you're praying for something that, because we hear in the Bible, we assume that when we want good things, that is what God has planned for our lives, and while that's true, yeah, part of God's will. The desires of our heart. We think those are going to be those things. I kind of just was reading in my personal devotions today, in First Chronicles, and it's a story of David trying to move the ark back to Jerusalem, and they put the ark on this cart, and basically this completely innocent cart driver is riding along, and what happens is, you may be familiar with this, they hit a bump, or the ox stumbles, and the guy reaches back and to touch it, to steady it so the ark doesn't fall, and God kills him, right? So, like, that is a story that we hear, and we're like, man, God is so unfair, God is so unjust to kill this guy. He was just trying to keep this ark upright. Again, a seemingly good endeavor. But I think when we look at that story and we kind of pull back from that, and we read on, right? So at that point, like, David gets upset with God. David basically goes to God and is like, why would you do this? Again, same questions that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at that story and looking at the big picture, that God had specific stipulations on how to carry his ark. So while David thought that it was a great endeavor to, hey, let's bring this back to our place, let's bring this back home, right? They didn't do it in the right spirit. They didn't bring it home. And not that we were fostering out of a wrong spirit, but still we get this idea that just because our intent is good,
we were doing a good thing,
that God is going to make it how we want. That in David's situation, that they were going to bring the ark back home. So to kind of wrap that account in the Bible up, David basically gives up, and then after a couple of years, he goes back, and then they do things right. And it's a lesson learned in that way, that, hey, we need to take the things of God very seriously. And again, perspective is a big thing. When we don't understand in the moment God's control or why God is doing something, it takes perspective. It takes us stepping back from our own circumstances, what we want, to understand that God is in control regardless. God is doing justly because he is a just God.
Yeah, so another thing that I had put, I think I struggled with the feeling that God had sacrificed Dell and Dell's future. And to think that, to think this, even subconsciously, is to think that God did not do the best thing. Like we said, Dell was on track to be adopted by a Christian family and to be in a church of believers in a Christian school, and to be raised, to hopefully one day love the Lord and believe in him. And he was sent to a place that we have no clue what his upbringing is going to be like. And so that was a struggle. But again, that is thinking that God doesn't care enough about him. When Dell was created by God, he is, made in the image of God. And just because Dell's not with us does not mean that God does not care about him. I don't know what's going to happen. And that's hard, not having control of where he is and what he's being taught. But, so I struggled with that. But I just had to remember that God didn't sacrifice Dell by sending him to a home that, as far as we have seen, is not a Christian home. All we can do really is pray that somebody would come in his life one day and teach him about God, or that he is being taught about the Lord. The next thing I wrote was, Kate, you struggle with not getting your own way or being in control of a situation, which I already knew, but I wrote it down just so I could read it later if I ever needed to. To think that God isn't sovereign is to say that your own way was better than God's. And I put, God has something better in store for Dell, and has something better in store for us and our family than what we would have had if Dell had stayed here with us. The next thing that I wrote, and the last thing, God faithfully walked us through some really awful fostering situations and some losses. He didn't abandon us. He was never not in control. And even though it was hard, and even though we grieved for a while, I mean, this situation was 5 years ago, and it still is very raw in some ways. But the Lord gave us an unmistakable peace and comfort in that time, and even in the next couple of years that we're struggling with this, and it has been neat to see how the Lord has used the situation that it was under His control all the time. We've been able to talk to a lot of people about it. We were pretty open, I would say, when we were going through it.
Yep.
And the Lord has used it. We've been able to talk to people in the community. I've talked to a lot of my school families in my class and my kids, and we had to learn a lesson about God being sovereign, not just from listening to the pastor preach about God is sovereign. We walked through it. We walked through a situation that we will probably, on this side of heaven, never know the outcome of. And that is hard. That is hard to give up control of something, and I don't know that I would necessarily want to go through it again. And another thing that we had talked about later on is that you kind of assume that, like, once the Lord walks you through something, that's it. Like, that was my trial. Yeah. We're not going to have to go through, and we're not going to have to go through anything else that's hard again. Like, we're good. We're set. We can coast now. And that is totally false. That was just our thinking. That was not correct. For a while, I really had a hard time. We would sing the song Sovereign One in church. And I think even just like maybe 4 months ago was the first time I was able to, as soon as it started playing, I would just burst into tears, because I knew the truth of that song, and I knew that was going to hurt deep to have to sing that. But the verse the verse of that song that really would hit me hard every time was, "When I don't get to have my own way, I will trust in you, for you know what is best. When tears begin to roll down my face, I will trust in you, for you are good, you are good." So that was a hard one to sing for the last 5 years.
Thank you for joining us.
In our home.
Thank you for joining me in our home. I appreciate it, and hanging out with me. So can you let those wondering minds know what has been your favorite part about quarantine?
Quarantine with two toddlers is not a walk in the park. Especially, I would say, can I tell my least favorite part first?
Sure.
So I had actually switched jobs and careers and was in my first year of teaching. So that has completely stunk, losing that end of the school year, like, sweet spot.
God's in control.
Thanks. But my favorite part has just been, like, the change of pace a little bit. That's been nice. Again, not a walk in the park with two toddlers. If you know our toddlers, they're energetic. Yeah,
I think we're at a good age-wise for them to be. I mean, maybe they could be a little bit more independent, but I think Carly is really getting into that, like, humorous, like, kids say the darndest
they're
stuff.
funny.
Yeah, phase. Funny. So I think that's helped. The fact that they're
and they're cute too. Yeah. So that helps too.
So that kind of alleviates the pain a little bit. So final question: what is your favorite hand soap scent that?
My favorite hand soap scent. I don't know. I like that Sweetwater scent.
Sweetwater.
What brand is that?
It's
from Target.
Yeah, the Mrs. Myers.
It's not Mrs. Myers. It's something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. Sweetwater. It's pretty good.
Sweetwater. Well, thanks again, and great job. I appreciate it.
Love you. Oh, don't put that on there.
Oh, I'm putting it on there. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.